February 1st, 2026, Tucson, Arizona, the Catalina foothills. A neighborhood where homes are spacious and well-maintained, where the desert landscape meets carefully cultivated gardens, where retirees live out their golden years in the warmth of the Sonoran sun. It is 2:30 in the morning. The streets are empty. The houses are dark. Most residents are asleep, their doors locked, their alarm systems armed, their lives proceeding according to the quiet rhythms of a community that has always felt safe. In one of these homes, an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie is about to become the victim of an abduction so calculated, so meticulously planned, and so disturbing in its execution that it will consume the attention of law enforcement agencies at the highest levels of government and generate thousands of tips from a public desperate to help bring her home. Nancy Guthrie is not just any 84-year-old woman, she is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. But Nancy herself has lived a quiet life. She is a retired educator, a grandmother, a woman who takes her medications on schedule, follows her routines with the precision that comes with age, and exists in a world far removed from the public spotlight that her daughter inhabits every weekday morning. She has no enemies that anyone can identify, no involvement in criminal activity, no reason to believe that anyone would target her for harm. And yet in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, someone comes for her. A masked man appears at her front door. He is wearing at least one mask, possibly two. He is wearing gloves. He is carrying a backpack, specifically a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack with reflective bands. He has what appears to be a holster on his hip. And in his hand, visible in surveillance footage that will later be recovered from Nancy's doorbell camera, there is an object that experts will spend weeks debating. Some will say it looks like a Wi-Fi jamming device. Others will argue it appears to be a handheld radio, a walkie-talkie, suggesting that someone else is involved, someone waiting nearby, someone coordinating. The man stands at Nancy's door. He is captured on camera, and then he enters the house. What happens next is not recorded, but we know from evidence that investigators will collect, from blood found on the front porch, from the timeline that will be painstakingly reconstructed, from the testimony of neighbors who will report hearing nothing unusual that night, that the man stays inside Nancy's home for 41 minutes. 41 minutes inside an occupied dwelling with an 84-year-old woman who is, by every indication, not cooperating voluntarily. 41 minutes during which anything could have gone wrong for him. A neighbor could have noticed. A car could have pulled up. Nancy could have triggered an alarm. The doorbell camera, which he attempts to cover with brush from her yard, could have captured more than he realized. And yet he stays for 41 minutes. And when he finally leaves, Nancy Guthrie leaves with him. Her blood is on the porch. Her front door is open. Her car is in the driveway. Her purse is inside. Her keys are inside. Her medications, the prescriptions she takes daily without fail, are inside. Everything that would indicate she left voluntarily is absent. And in the more than 40 days since that night, not a single arrest has been made. But something has changed in the investigation. Something significant. And it comes from an analysis conducted by a retired FBI agent who has spent decades studying blood spatter evidence, who has testified in hundreds of cases, who has trained law enforcement officers across the country in the science of reading crime scenes. Her name is Maureen O'Connell, and what she has to say about the blood evidence found on Nancy Guthrie's front porch changes everything we thought we knew about how Nancy was taken and what her chances of survival might be. This is the complete investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The blood evidence, the ex-FBI analysis, the theory that Nancy was carried out by two people, the second pair of hearing aids that could hold the key to finding her, the mysterious January 11th video request, the damaged utility box, and the heartbreaking conclusion from a veteran investigator who says, with tears in her eyes, that she no longer believes Nancy is alive. Stay with me. Because what you are about to hear is not speculation. This is forensic analysis. This is expert testimony. This is the truth that the evidence is telling us. And it is darker than anyone wanted to believe. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at Forensic Disconnect, we go deeper than the headlines. We examine the evidence that investigators are analyzing right now. We bring you expert analysis from people who have spent their careers solving cases exactly like this one. New investigations every week. Now let's begin with the blood, because the blood on Nancy Guthrie's front porch tells a story. And that story, according to Maureen O'Connell, a retired FBI agent with expertise in blood spatter analysis, is not the story that most people have been imagining. The morning of February 1st, 2026, when investigators arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home after she was reported missing, they found blood. Not pools of blood, not the kind of massive blood loss that indicates a violent stabbing or shooting, but droplets. A pattern of blood droplets on the front porch. The blood was tested. It was Nancy's blood. That was confirmed early in the investigation. The presence of her blood on the porch, combined with the fact that her front door was standing open, that her car was still in the driveway, that her purse and keys and medications were all inside, immediately told investigators that this was not a case of a woman wandering off confused or deciding to leave on her own. This was an abduction. Someone had taken Nancy Guthrie from her home by force, and the blood was evidence of that force. But what the blood pattern tells us, according to Maureen O'Connell's analysis, goes far beyond the simple fact that Nancy was bleeding when she left her house. It tells us how she left. It tells us whether she was conscious or unconscious. It tells us whether she was walking or being carried. And it tells us, with a high degree of probability, that there were two people involved in her abduction, not one. Let's break down the evidence piece by piece, because understanding what the blood pattern reveals is essential to understanding what happened to Nancy Guthrie in those critical moments when she was taken from her home. Blood spatter analysis is a forensic science that examines the patterns, locations, and characteristics of bloodstains at a crime scene to reconstruct the events that caused the bloodshed. When blood falls or is projected from a source, it behaves according to the laws of physics. Gravity affects it, velocity affects it, surface tension affects it. The angle at which it strikes a surface affects the shape of the stain. The distance it travels affects the size of the droplet. All of these factors can be measured and analyzed, and from that analysis, experts can determine what was happening at the moment the blood was shed. Was the source of the blood moving or stationary? Was the bleeding caused by a low-energy event, like blood dripping from a wound, or a high-energy event, like an arterial spray from a severed vessel? Was the person who was bleeding walking, running, standing still, or being carried? These are the kinds of questions that blood spatter analysts answer. And in Nancy Guthrie's case, Maureen O'Connell looked at the blood droplets found on the front porch and asked those exact questions. What she found was striking. The blood droplets on Nancy's porch were round, not elongated, not distorted. Round. That detail is critical. When a droplet of blood falls straight down, perpendicular to the surface it strikes, it creates a round stain. But when a droplet of blood falls at an angle, when the source of the blood is moving forward while the blood is falling, the stain becomes elongated. It develops a tail. The faster the forward motion, the more elongated the stain becomes. If Nancy had been walking out of her house while bleeding, even if she was being pushed or dragged, the blood droplets would have been elongated. They would have shown directionality. They would have indicated movement, but they did not. The droplets were round, which means, according to O'Connell's analysis, that Nancy was not walking when the blood fell. She was being carried. Her body was being moved in a way that kept the source of the bleeding, likely her nose or mouth, relatively stationary in a vertical orientation, and the blood was dripping straight down. But there is more. O'Connell also noted that there were no voids in the blood pattern. A void is an area where blood is absent, even though you would expect it to be present based on the surrounding pattern. Voids are created when an object or a person blocks the blood from reaching a particular area. For example, if someone is standing next to a bleeding person and blood is being projected or dripping, that standing person's shoes or legs will create voids in the blood pattern on the ground. Those voids can tell investigators where people were standing, what they were doing, and how they were positioned relative to the source of the blood. On Nancy Guthrie's porch, there were no voids, no areas where blood should have been, but was not. What does that mean? It means that no one was standing still on that porch while Nancy was bleeding. If Nancy had been standing on the porch with someone holding her by the arm, with blood dripping from her nose, there would be voids where that person's feet were planted. But there are no voids. The blood pattern is consistent with Nancy being lifted off the ground, carried in a horizontal or semi-horizontal position, with her head elevated enough that blood was dripping straight down from her face, and the people carrying her were moving. They were not standing still. They were in motion, lifting her, transporting her from the front door to wherever they were taking her, likely a vehicle parked nearby. And here is where O'Connell's analysis becomes even more significant. She believes that Nancy was carried by two people, not one. Why? Because of the logistics. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is not a large woman, but she is still an adult. Carrying an adult human body, particularly if that person is unconscious and therefore dead weight, is extremely difficult for a single individual. It requires strength. It requires balance. It requires the ability to manage the weight distribution while also navigating obstacles like doorways, steps, uneven surfaces. And it requires doing all of that quickly and quietly in the middle of the night in a residential neighborhood where the slightest noise could alert a neighbor. One person could do it, yes, but it would be much easier, much faster, and much less likely to result in the person being dropped or injured if two people were involved, one person supporting the upper body, the other supporting the legs, working together to lift Nancy and carry her out of the house and into whatever vehicle they were using. O'Connell's assessment, based on the blood evidence and the logistics of the situation, is that two people carried Nancy Guthrie out of her home, which means that the masked man captured on the doorbell camera may not have been acting alone. There may have been an accomplice, someone who was not visible on camera, someone who entered through a different entrance or who stayed out of the camera's line of sight or who was waiting in a vehicle nearby, someone who helped lift Nancy's unconscious body and carry her away. And that brings us to the next critical question. Was Nancy conscious or unconscious when she was taken? Maureen O'Connell's analysis strongly suggests that Nancy was unconscious, and the reason has to do with the blood itself. Blood was coming from Nancy's nose. That is clear from the pattern. Blood dripping from the nose can be caused by trauma, a blow to the face, a fall, anything that ruptures the small blood vessels inside the nasal cavity, but it can also be caused by other factors. High blood pressure, dry air, certain medications. However, if Nancy had been conscious and aware that she was bleeding, if she had been awake and alert while being carried out of her house, she would have reacted. She would have tried to cover her nose. She would have tried to stop the bleeding. And if her captors had wanted to keep her quiet, if they were concerned that she might scream or cry out, they would have covered her mouth with duct tape, with a gag, with something. And if there had been duct tape or any other obstruction over her mouth, the blood dripping from her nose would have hit that obstruction. It would have created a different pattern. It would have been smeared or redirected. But the blood pattern is clean. Round droplets falling straight down, no indication of any obstruction, no indication of any attempt by Nancy to interfere with the bleeding, which means, according to O'Connell, that Nancy was likely unconscious. She was not aware of what was happening. She was not struggling. She was not trying to stop the bleeding. She was limp. She was being carried, and the blood was simply dripping from her nose as her body was moved. How did Nancy become unconscious? That is a question that the investigation has not yet answered publicly, but there are several possibilities. She could have been struck and rendered unconscious by a blow to the head. She could have been drugged. She could have been choked into unconsciousness. Any of these methods could explain why she was not resisting, why she was not making noise, why the people carrying her were able to move her out of the house without waking the neighbors or triggering any alarms. But the fact that she was unconscious, combined with the fact that she was likely carried by two people, paints a picture of an abduction that was carefully planned and executed with a level of coordination that suggests experience, or at least significant forethought. Maureen O'Connell's analysis does not stop with the blood pattern. She also addresses the question that has haunted this case from the beginning. Is Nancy Guthrie still alive? And her answer, delivered in an interview where her voice breaks with emotion, is heartbreaking. She says, and this is a direct quote, "Do I think she's alive now? I could almost burst into tears. I was so hopeful for so long, but I think too much time has passed now. I'm so sad about it." This is a woman who has spent her career analyzing evidence, who has seen the best and worst of what human beings are capable of, who has worked on cases where victims were recovered alive against all odds, and she is saying that she no longer believes Nancy Guthrie is alive. Why? What has led her to that conclusion? The answer is time. It has been more than 40 days since Nancy was taken. 40 days in the Arizona desert, where daytime temperatures in February can reach into the 70s and 80s, where nighttime temperatures drop into the 40s and 50s, where there is little natural water, where survival without resources is measured in days, not weeks. If Nancy was taken into the desert and left there, if she was injured or incapacitated, if she was not given food or water, she would not have survived. Even if she was initially alive when she was taken, the passage of time makes survival increasingly unlikely. And O'Connell, looking at the evidence, looking at the blood pattern that suggests Nancy was unconscious, Looking at the fact that no ransom has been paid, no contact has been made, no credible sighting has been reported, has come to the sad conclusion that Nancy is most likely deceased. But she is careful to note that this is her professional opinion based on the evidence available. It is not a certainty. And until Nancy's body is found, until there is definitive proof, there is always a possibility, however slim, that she could still be alive. The blood evidence is not the only new development in the Nancy Guthrie case. There is also the theory of the second pair of hearing aids. And this theory, put forward by digital forensics expert Heather Barnhart, could be the key to finding Nancy. Here is what we know. Nancy Guthrie wore hearing aids. Hearing aids, like many modern medical devices, are increasingly sophisticated pieces of technology. They connect wirelessly to smartphones. They can be controlled through apps. They can be updated with software. And, critically, they can be tracked. Most modern hearing aids have a Find My Device feature similar to what exists for smartphones, tablets, and other electronics. If you lose your hearing aids, you can use an app on your phone to see the last known location where the hearing aids were connected to your phone. The hearing aids emit a Bluetooth signal that the phone can detect, and the app shows you on a map where that signal was last detected. This feature exists specifically to help people find hearing aids that they have misplaced, but it can also be used in investigations. When Nancy Guthrie disappeared, her hearing aids were found in her home. They were left behind. That is a confirmed fact. Investigators found them. But here is the question that Heather Barnhart raises. Did Nancy have a second pair of hearing aids? It is not uncommon for people who rely on hearing aids to have a backup pair. Hearing aids can malfunction. Batteries can die. Having a second pair ensures that you are never without the ability to hear. And if Nancy had a second pair, if she was wearing that second pair when she was taken, then those hearing aids may have been connected to her smartphone via Bluetooth. And if they were connected, even briefly, there would be a record. The app on Nancy's phone, or the cloud storage associated with her hearing aid account, would show the last known location where those hearing aids connected to the network. That location could be Nancy's home if the connection was lost as soon as she was taken, but it could also be somewhere else. It could be a location along the route that her abductors traveled. It could be the place where she was taken. And if investigators can access that data, if they can pull the location history from the hearing aid manufacturer or from the Bluetooth connection logs on Nancy's phone, they might be able to narrow down the search area significantly. Heather Barnhart, in her analysis, notes that Nancy's smartphone was left behind at the house. The phone is tied to both her hearing aids and her pacemaker. Both devices communicate with the phone. Both devices have tracking capabilities. But if the phone was left behind, if Nancy did not have the phone with her, then the hearing aids would have lost their connection shortly after she left the house. The last known location would be wherever the Bluetooth signal from the hearing aids was last detected by the phone. And that location, if it can be determined, could tell investigators which direction Nancy was taken. Barnhart goes on to say that the FBI either already knows this information and is holding it close to the vest as part of the investigation, or they fell short and did not think to check for a second pair of hearing aids, or did not realize the tracking potential of those devices. She is hopeful that it is the former, that investigators have this information, that they are using it to guide their search. But she cannot say for certain. What we do know is that the pacemaker has also been a focus of the investigation. Nancy's pacemaker, a device implanted in her chest to regulate her heartbeat, syncs with her smartphone and transmits data. The last time Nancy's pacemaker synced with her phone was at 2:30 a.m. on February 1st, the same time the masked man was captured on her doorbell camera. After that, there was no further sync. The pacemaker continued to function, but it was no longer communicating with the phone. Investigators have deployed a signal sniffer, a device designed to detect the faint electronic signal that pacemakers emit. Search teams have walked through the desert surrounding Tucson, scanning for any trace of that signal. But so far they have not found it. Either Nancy is not in the areas they have searched, or the pacemaker's signal is too weak to detect at the distances involved, or the pacemaker has stopped functioning. But the hearing aid theory offers a different avenue. If there was a second pair, if they were connected to Nancy's phone even briefly, that connection could provide a clue that the pacemaker data cannot. There is another detail that has emerged in recent days, a detail that investigators have not fully explained, but that has generated significant speculation among those following the case. On March 5th, more than a month after Nancy's disappearance, FBI agents went door to door in Nancy's neighborhood asking residents a very specific question. Do you have video footage from January 11th? Not February 1st, the day Nancy was taken. January 11th, 3 weeks before the abduction. Why are investigators interested in January 11th? They have not said. They have not offered any explanation for why that date is significant. But the fact that they are asking for video from that specific date suggests that something happened on January 11th that is relevant to the investigation. One theory is that the person who abducted Nancy was scouting the neighborhood on January 11th, that he was in the area, watching Nancy's house, studying her routine, looking for vulnerabilities in her security, and that he was captured on a neighbor's security camera. If that is the case, if there is video of the suspect from 3 weeks before the abduction, it could provide investigators with additional images, additional angles, additional details that could help identify him. Another theory is that there was an earlier incident on January 11th, an attempted abduction that failed, or a confrontation, or something that Nancy herself may have reported or mentioned to someone. But again, investigators have not said. All we know is that January 11th is significant enough that the FBI is asking for video from that date, and whatever they are looking for, it is important enough to justify going door to door more than a month after the abduction. Then, there is the damaged utility box. Neighbors in Nancy's area reported that their internet connections and Ring cameras went offline around the time of her disappearance. Some neighbors said their cameras were not working between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on February 1st, the critical window when Nancy was taken. Initially, this led to speculation that the suspect used a Wi-Fi jammer, an illegal device that emits radio signals to disrupt wireless communications. Wi-Fi jammers can disable cameras, internet routers, alarm systems, anything that relies on Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. If the suspect used such a device, it would demonstrate a high level of technical sophistication and planning. But there is another possibility. A damaged utility box was found near Nancy's home. The box, which is part of the infrastructure that provides internet service to the neighborhood, was damaged. Whether the damage was intentional or accidental is unclear, but the timing is suspicious. If someone deliberately damaged the utility box to cause an internet outage in the area, it would have the same effect as a Wi-Fi jammer. Cameras would go offline. Alarm systems that rely on internet connectivity would be disabled. The suspect would have a window of time to operate without being recorded. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has investigated the utility box, but has not publicly stated whether it is connected to Nancy's abduction. The investigation into that piece of evidence is ongoing, but the possibility that the suspect caused a deliberate internet outage, either through a jammer or through physical sabotage, adds another layer to the profile of who this person is. This is not someone acting on impulse. This is someone who understands technology, who understands security systems, who planned ahead, who created conditions that would allow him to operate with minimal risk of being caught on camera. One more detail has added complexity to this case, though it is not directly related to the evidence. Sheriff Chris Nanos, the man leading the investigation, has been at the center of a controversy involving his employment history. It was revealed that Nanos misstated details of his law enforcement career. He resigned from the El Paso Police Department in 1982, but he had previously stated that he left in 1984. More significantly, his resignation was described as in lieu of termination, meaning he resigned to avoid being fired. The reasons for the potential termination included disciplinary issues such as insubordination, allegations of excessive force, off-duty gambling, and chronic tardiness. When confronted with this discrepancy, Nanos declined to address it in detail. Why does this matter? Because Sheriff Nanos is the public face of this investigation. He is the one who has repeatedly stated that he personally believes Nancy Guthrie is alive. He is the one who has said that investigators are definitely getting closer to solving the case. And he is the one whose credibility is now being questioned because of the discrepancies in his employment history. Does this mean that his statements about the investigation are unreliable? Not necessarily. But it does mean that the public and the media are now scrutinizing everything he says more carefully. And it raises questions about why someone with a disciplinary history that includes resignation in lieu of termination was elected to the position of sheriff in the first place. These are uncomfortable questions, but they are questions that matter when the credibility of the person leading the investigation is at stake. As of today, March 12, 2026, day 40 of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the investigation continues. More than 40,000 tips have been received. The vast majority have been investigated and ruled out. But investigators are still pursuing leads. A dedicated task force of 4 detectives and 1 sergeant is working full-time on the case, based out of the FBI office in Tucson. The $1.2 million reward, one of the largest in Arizona history, remains active. The The reward is being offered for information leading to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her abduction. The FBI has made it clear that tips can be submitted anonymously, that people who are afraid of retaliation or who are worried about getting involved or who are not sure whether what they know is important can still call and provide information without identifying themselves. The investigation is also using forensic genetic genealogy to analyze the DNA that was recovered from Nancy's home. Mixed DNA was found inside the house. That DNA has been submitted to CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, and there were no matches. But investigators can upload the DNA profile to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA and use those databases to build a family tree that could lead to the identification of the person who left that DNA. This is the same technique that was used to identify the Golden State Killer. It takes time. It requires skilled genealogists who can trace family lines back through generations, but it works. And if the suspect has relatives who have used ancestry services and uploaded their DNA, there is a real possibility that he can be identified through this method. Cadaver dogs, which were deployed early in the investigation, have been suspended. They are not currently being used in the search. Why? There are several possible explanations. One is that investigators do not know where to search. The area surrounding Tucson is vast. The desert extends in every direction for hundreds of square miles. Without a more specific search area, deploying cadaver dogs is inefficient. Another explanation is that investigators believe Nancy is being held in a location where dogs cannot detect her. If she is inside a building, if she is concealed in a way that prevents the scent from dispersing, cadaver dogs would not be effective. A third explanation is the Mexico theory. Tucson is 60 miles from the Mexican border. If Nancy was taken across the border, if she is in Mexico, then cadaver dogs in Arizona would be useless. And a fourth explanation, the one that Sheriff Nanos seems to believe, is that Nancy is alive. And if she is alive, cadaver dogs are not the right tool. But the decision to suspend the use of cadaver dogs has alarmed some experts, who interpret it as a sign that investigators believe Nancy is deceased and that finding her body is no longer the immediate priority. Instead, the priority is identifying the suspect and building a case that can lead to an arrest and conviction. The FBI has identified 6 theories that they are actively evaluating. Burglary, though this is considered less likely because nothing was stolen from Nancy's home. Ransom kidnapping, targeting Savannah Guthrie's wealth. Savannah is estimated to be worth $40 million. If someone believed that kidnapping her mother would result in a ransom payment, that could be the motive. But no credible ransom demand has been made. Professional hit. The theory that someone with experience in abduction or contract killing was hired to take Nancy. The level of planning and execution is consistent with this theory. Cartel or organized crime involvement. Tucson's proximity to the border and the presence of drug trafficking organizations in the region make this a possibility, though there is no clear motive for why a cartel would target Nancy. Insider access. The theory that someone familiar with Nancy's property, someone who knew the layout, knew her routine, knew where the cameras were, was involved. And finally, random opportunistic crime, which is considered the least likely given the evidence of planning. Each of these theories is being investigated. Each has strengths and weaknesses. And as evidence continues to come in, some theories are being elevated while others are being deprioritized. The families of both Nancy Guthrie and Savannah Guthrie are living through an unimaginable nightmare. Savannah returned to the Today Show studio on March 5th for the first time since her mother's disappearance. It was an emotional visit. Her co-workers embraced her. There were tears. Savannah described it as a step, a small movement toward resuming some part of her normal life, but she made it clear that her focus remains entirely on bringing her mother home. On March the 2nd, Savannah and her sister Annie visited Nancy's home in Tucson. They placed flowers at the memorial that has been growing outside the house. They left a card that read, "Though we are surrounded by so much darkness and uncertainty, our love burns bright. We love you, Mommy. We miss you so much." The image of Savannah Guthrie, a woman who interviews presidents and covers breaking news with professional composure, standing at her mother's home in visible grief, is a reminder that this is not an abstract mystery. This is a real family, real pain, real stakes, and the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes. Maureen O'Connell's analysis of the blood evidence has added a layer of understanding to this case that did not exist before. The round droplets, the absence of voids, the conclusion that Nancy was carried by 2 people, the assessment that she was unconscious, and the heartbreaking statement that too much time has passed, that she no longer believes Nancy is alive. These are not the conclusions that anyone wanted to hear, but they are the conclusions that the evidence supports. And in a case like this, where every piece of information matters, where every detail could be the one that leads to a breakthrough, expert analysis like O'Connell's is essential. It helps investigators understand what happened. It helps them focus their efforts. And it helps the public understand the reality of what Nancy Guthrie likely experienced in those final moments before she was taken from her home. If you have any information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, please contact authorities. The FBI can be reached at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department can be reached at 520-351-4900. Tips can also be submitted online at tips.fbi.gov, and those tips can be submitted anonymously. The $1.2 million reward is active. That reward is for information that leads to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her abduction. You may know something without realizing its significance. You may have seen a vehicle. You may have heard someone talking. You may know someone whose behavior changed after February 1st. You may recognize the masked man from the surveillance footage. Whatever you know, no matter how small it seems, it could be the piece of information that brings Nancy home. Someone out there knows what happened. Someone saw something, someone heard something, and that someone needs to come forward. Because Nancy Guthrie, wherever she is, deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers, and the person responsible deserves to be held accountable. This investigation is not over. The circle is closing, and the truth, no matter how painful, will eventually be revealed. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect for updates as this case continues. Hit that like button, share this video, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Nancy is still alive? Do you believe the ex-FBI agent's analysis that she was carried out by two people? What do you think happened on January 11th? These are questions that we are all asking, and the answers, when they come, will tell us whether justice can still be served even when the person we are seeking may no longer be with us. Nancy Guthrie was a real person. She is a mother, a grandmother, a woman who lived a quiet, peaceful life and who did nothing to deserve what happened to her. Remember her. Share her story, and help bring her home.